again, it's pretty easy to invoke Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in a place where they've been the boogeyman for quite some time anyway. And that's what motivates a lot of these Alabama voters.
Yeah.
Positioning this race as us versus them. That's why they don't have the ears to hear about how deplorable, and I will use that word with unabashedly to describe Roy Moore, how deplorable he is as a candidate. They don't care. It's become us versus them, and that's why any of the conventional criticism against Roy Moore and what used to be common decency is not working, because they framed it this way about the Washington establishment, including against Republican leadership, to be honest.
And Brian, I mean, the president also bringing up Hillary Clinton.
Yes, and I'm sure that plays well in this deeply red corner of the country, the panhandle of Florida. I basically agree with what David Gergen said at the top of the panel. I think this will deliver a short-term gain to Roy Moore's candidacy in Alabama, but I think that in the long term, this is just hastening a backlash that we're going to see play out nationally against Republicans next year. If you think of this movement that has taken hold over the last few months, where women have come forward, started to tell their story, finally hold men in positions of power accountable. It was really, I think, brought along by the election of Donald Trump in the first place. You saw the women's rally the day after the inauguration. A lot of women and a lot of men were horrified by the fact that Donald Trump could basically admit on tape to committing sexual assault and then win the presidency anyway. So if you on Tuesday have Roy Moore basically have a rerun of what happened with Donald Trump in 2016, have somebody, an alleged a sexual assaulter be elected to the Senate with Donald Trump sort of willfully campaigning for him, holding up, might as well be posing for a picture with him. I think that they are basically daring that women's movement to take them on, and I think you will see those women rise up next year in districts in Senate and House races across the country.
We're going to have more from the president, also more from the panel coming up, plus a warning from President Obama with echoes of the Second World War in what he said. Later, the Trump campaign advisor, was he just a kid who got coffee or in high-level contact with campaign officials as he made contact with someone with ties to the Kremlin? Details ahead. President Trump's speech tonight rallying the base in the Florida Panhandle comes just 3 days after former President Obama spoke in Chicago, and though he never mentioned President Trump by name, he issued a veiled warning about the dangers when only the hardcore base, and not everyone, is involved in electoral politics.
You have to tend to this garden of democracy, otherwise things can fall apart fairly quickly. And we've seen societies where that happens, right? Now, presumably there was a ballroom here in Vienna in the late 1920s or 30s that looked pretty sophisticated and seemed as if, with the music and the art and the literature and the science that was emerging, it would continue into perpetuity. And then 60 million people died. And an entire world was plunged into chaos. So, you got to pay attention and vote.
Back now with the panel. I mean, Gloria, this is the same kind of thing that General Michael Hayden has said repeatedly, and Clapper and others. I mean, pretty ominous remarks coming from the former president of the United States.
Yeah, it's pretty apocalyptic. And look, I think it's the way Obama feels, that we're going through something that we all need to pay attention to now. The interesting thing to me, though, is that President Obama is not in Alabama campaigning for Jones. And I think the reason he is not doing that is that perhaps Democrats feel that that would not necessarily help. You haven't seen a lot of high-profile Democrats down there. You have some African Americans, Cory Booker, John Lewis, who are out talking about who will go to Alabama for more, and Joe Biden went in October. But I think that there is a sense that if someone like Obama went in, like he went in Northern Virginia, but I think there is a sense that he ought to not go into Alabama, particularly with, he feels so strongly about this. You know how he feels about this race. And you know how he feels about what's going on in the country if you listen to that. But so it's interesting to me that he is not there.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, it's an interesting idea that if President Obama or somebody else, a high-level Democrat, did go down, that it might actually motivate not only Roy Moore supporters more, not that they need more motivation, but it might motivate some Republicans who are on the fence and thinking of maybe just sitting this one out. It might motivate them to go for more.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of Jones's challenges on Tuesday will be sufficiently motivating the African American portion of the electorate. I think he needs it to be somewhere around 28-30% of the overall electorate to have a good chance of winning. And so in isolation, sending the president down, President Obama, would be helpful in that regard. But I think in general, Jones's strategy has been the right one, which is to seek to avoid nationalizing this race. If you look at, for instance, what happened in Georgia, Jack may have his own views on that, but in terms of Georgia 6, that election, the more national attention that came to that election, the more it woke up the Republican base, and the fundamental redness of that district sort of showed itself in the end. Mm-hmm. Karen Handel was able to hold on. I think Democrats have wisely tried to avoid nationalizing this race, and that's the worst. Donald Trump next year, when the midterm elections happen, Donald Trump is going to be on the ballot, not in a literal sense, but all these Democratic candidates are going to be going around, and the fundamental choice that voters in those districts will face is, do they want to send somebody there to help carry out Trump's agenda? Trump in the campaign was able to throw out a lot of smoke screens, and people would raise issues about him not releasing his taxes. He'd point to Hillary Clinton and the foundation. He continues to try to invoke Hillary Clinton because he needs a foil and he needs an enemy. Democrats would be wise not to give him that foil. Let this election in Alabama be a referendum on Roy Moore. Let this election nationally in the midterms next year be a referendum on the direction that Donald Trump's taking the country.
Jack, when you hear former President Obama sort of speaking in what Gloria described as sort of apocalyptic terms or warning about, how easily sort of how tenuous democracy is, I'm wondering what you think of that.
I think it just rings hollow. This is the president who, as a candidate, said they'll bring their knives, we'll bring our guns. I was in Congress. The president was not a very bipartisan leader. I was in the Congress when President Clinton was, and so I can compare it. I think that we have got into a rut in our country where each side has figured out getting their own base out to vote is easier than trying to convert people who are sitting on a fence. But, I want to say this in terms of Alabama. I do believe that if this candidate was a Joe Donnelly or a Joe Manchin, he would be fine right now. I think the Democrats would take this seat. But unfortunately, Mr. Jones is not out of step at all with Pelosi and Schumer, and there is an enemy, and those are the enemies, Brian. I mean, in terms of politics again, but he has not distinguished himself as an Alabamian. So he has been more of a national Democrat, which is not good politics down there.
And Anderson, I think if Moore wins, Republicans might rue the day here, because he is now their hood ornament, and Democrats can certainly use that against them. And also, in terms of everything Mitch McConnell wants to do for the president, I'm not so sure Roy Moore, if he were to be seated, would be with them on half of these things. Roy Moore is kind of out there.
I agree with you.
And so I think he's going to cause problems, not only for Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, but also, also for the rest of the party, and they may say, well, why did we even bring this guy into Congress?
Yeah, David Gergen, the president bringing up Hillary Clinton tonight, the crowd going with a lock her up chant. It is interesting that he continues to talk about her. He continues to tweet about her. I mean, it's been a year since the election.
I know, he can't give it up. And she's still bruised badly, too. So, you'd hope for the country's sake we'd move beyond it. But let me come back to what, if I might, to what President Obama was saying, and that is he's giving voice to a conversation that now is growing in universities around the world, and that is the threats to democracy that we see. What Obama reminded us of was that between the end of the First World War and the beginning of the Second World War, the number of democracies in the world declined significantly. it is possible to go backwards. And progress is not inevitable. You have to really work at making democracies thrive. And what we're seeing in the world today, as academics are pointing out to us, is the rise of authoritarian movements and country after country, strongmen emerging in places like Turkey and Egypt and the Philippines and a growing number of other countries. And the worry that people are starting to have about whether our own democracy is under some threat. This polarization is driving us apart. And the lack of civility, the lack of concern for each other is something I think deserves a more serious conversation of the kind that Obama's pointing us toward.
I want to thank everybody. Coming up, after former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, the president and his team made him out to be a very low-level volunteer, a coffee boy, some called him. Now his fiancée is speaking out, saying she has a much different view, much different story of his role in the campaign. That's next. Tonight, the fiancée of former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos is speaking out. He's pled guilty to lying to the FBI, and the president and his team have tried to downplay his role in the campaign, one former advisor calling him the coffee boy. His fiancée says that is not true at all. She spoke with CNN's Pamela Brown.
What have you seen, what have you read that doesn't square with the George Papadopoulos you know?
George Papadopoulos has everything but a coffee boy.
Simona Mangianta says despite what the White House says about her fiancé, George Papadopoulos,
it was a volunteer position.
He was the coffee boy.
He was not a low-level volunteer in the Trump campaign or a rogue agent who acted without approval.
He was foreign policy advisor for the campaign. He helped also editing Trump's speech on foreign policy. He attended many events and entertained contacts with the high-level officials of different countries. He was actively giving his input and insights on in terms of strategies, and of course he was in contact with the high-level officials and got approved for any initiative.
In March of 2016, President Trump named him as a top foreign policy advisor.
George Papadopoulos. He's an oil and energy consultant, excellent guy.
Later, Papadopoulos met with the president and now Attorney General Jeff Sessions, where Papadopoulos allegedly proposed setting up a meeting between Trump and Putin. Sessions claims he nixed the idea. But when news broke about his cooperation with the special counsel, President Trump slammed Papadopoulos in a tweet.
A young, low-level volunteer who was already proven to be a liar. What was your reaction when you saw that tweet?
As the same person who called him an excellent guy. So I agree with that.
Mangianta says her fiancé interacted with campaign manager Corey Lewandowski, Steve Bannon, Paul Manafort, and other top campaign officials, including Michael Glassner, Sam Clovis, and Rick Dearborn. And she says during the transition, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Most have denied, downplayed, or said they didn't recall their interactions with him.
You say that he was consistently in touch with these high-level campaign officials.
Yes.
What was his interaction with Michael Flynn?
He was in contact with Michael Flynn, and he worked with Michael Flynn during the transition, and he was actively contributing to develop the foreign policy strategies for the campaign, and he didn't take any initiative on his own without campaign approval.
Court documents show Papadopoulos emailed campaign officials in March 2016 about setting up a meeting in Moscow between us, the Trump campaign, and the Russian leadership to discuss U.S.-Russia ties under President Trump. A campaign supervisor, now identified as Sam Clovis, responded, quote, "Great work," and later wrote, "I would encourage you to make the trip if it is feasible." In a separate email, a campaign official now identified as Paul Manafort wrote, "It should be someone low-level in the campaign so as not to send any signal." Mangianta tells CNN that Papadopoulos even did an interview in the fall of 2016 with Russian news agency Interfax. And she says the campaign's deputy communications director, Brian Lanza, who is now a CNN contributor, signed off on it. Lanza declined to comment.
So the campaign approved him doing the only interview, as far as you know, with Russia media Interfax?
Yes.
Signed off by the campaign?
Yes.
Was Russia a big focus for him too? Like, did he have a lot of contacts there?
My understanding of his contribution to the campaign, Russian was really secondary, and he really did big work with the Egyptians, Israel.
She points to his role as a foreign policy panelist at the Republican National Convention.
The Jordan Valley, sure.
And a meeting with Israeli settlers around Inauguration Day, seen here in video obtained by the Jerusalem Post.
There's a time.
And while she says Papadopoulos communicated with Bannon, Dearborn, and Flynn later in the campaign, he never discussed Russia with them.
Why do you think the White House was so quick to come out and call him a coffee boy or a low-level volunteer?
I think they wanted to dissociate from the first person who decided to actively cooperate with the government. I suppose this can be quite threatening for some people.
Manjanta says she was interviewed by the FBI in October and that a key focus was on London-based professor Joseph Mifsud, suspected of being a link between the Trump campaign and Russian officials.
A lot of discussion in terms of...
Mifsud allegedly told Papadopoulos during the campaign that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton, thousands of emails. Manjanta says she met Papadopoulos in September 2016 through LinkedIn because she was working at the London Center of International Law Practice, where he had worked earlier in the year. When they met, Mifsud was running the center.
I suppose that the FBI was interested in knowing my connection with Mifsud, and which makes perfectly sense. It's quite a strange coincidence that we both worked for the same person.
She says despite that coincidence, she told the FBI she's not a Russian spy.
They asked me if I speak Russian, if I know Russian people. I think people got wild on Twitter about me being a spy, thinking I was the Russian Putin's, that was like a bit of fantasies and everything.
Manjanta says despite everything they've been through, she continues to stand by her fiancé and his willingness to work with investigators.
I'm very proud of it, of this choice to cooperate with the right side of the history.
Pamela joins us now. What did Papadopoulos' fiancé say about him lying to the FBI?
Well, I asked her about that, Anderson, and she says that he didn't intentionally mislead the FBI. She says she believes he might have gotten confused with the dates about when he met with Professor Mifsud. But she says he is taking full responsibility for it. As you know, he pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. And Manjanta says she hopes President Trump will pardon her fiancé because she says he has been loyal to him. We reached out to the White House, and the White House did not provide a comment for this story. Anderson.
Pamela Brown, thanks very much. At the top of the program, we intended to show you a picture of White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah. Instead, we showed you a photo of another Raj Shah, formerly in government. We regret the error. We're going to have more on the Russia investigation tonight, including the breaking news from the New York Times about presidential advisor Hope Hicks and the warning the FBI gave her about Russian operatives. Also, our other breaking news out of Washington, Congressman Trent Franks moves up his resignation date from January to today. We'll tell you why when we come back. There's more breaking news tonight. Congressman Trent Franks has moved up his resignation date from January to today. Also tonight, a confidant of one of Franks' accusers says she was told the congressman offered $5 million to bear his child. CNN Sunler Safadi joins me now with more. So what more are you learning about the allegations against Congressman Franks?
Well, some of these new details to the allegations, Anderson, are quite disturbing. I spoke this evening to a confidant of one of the accusers, a former aide in the congressman's office, who she says has detailed these allegations over the course of a couple years to her. She says the former aide says she was asked by the congressman to be a surrogate in exchange for money. The woman said she was asked to look over a contract to potentially carry a child for him. And it was said if she conceived his child, she would be given $5 million. Now, this is according to Andrea Lafferty. She's the president of the Traditional Values Coalition. She was in the room last week when this accuser brought her story to Speaker of the House Paul Ryan's office up here on Capitol Hill. And we know there was a very swift move by the Speaker's office to pressure him to resign and to leave. Anderson.
And why the sudden change of date for the congressman's resignation?
Yeah, this was really interesting. Yesterday, he said he would resign on January 31st. Today, he says he will resign today, effective immediately. Now, officially, the congressman is essentially pinning it on his family. He says that his wife was admitted to the hospital with an ongoing ailment and that the best thing for his family to do right now is to be by her side. But clearly, there was so much pressure on him. Clearly, there was just no appetite for him to stay a day longer up here on Capitol Hill. And we do know from Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, he believes the allegations, he called them yesterday, very credible. incredible and very serious.
All right, Sutherland, appreciate that. New information now about Russia's efforts to connect with the president's team. The New York Times is reporting the FBI warned President Trump's communication director, Hope Hicks, about Russian operatives who tried to make contact with her during the transition process. CNN Justice correspondent Jessica Schneider is here with the latest on that. So what do we know about the FBI warning?
Well, we know that senior FBI officials, they cautioned Hope Hicks about several introductory emails that she received after the election. They were from Russian government email addresses. So FBI agents met with Hope Hicks twice at the beginning of this year inside the Situation Room at the White House. And they told her that these emails were not what they seemed and that they may have been part of a Russian intelligence operation. That's all according to the New York Times. So, Anderson, this was a very specific warning, and it shows that law enforcement was alarmed that Russians were still trying to establish contacts with the Trump team even after the election. Reportedly, Hope Hicks disclosed the meetings with the FBI to White House counsel Don McGahn. And we also know that Hicks met with the special counsel's team today and yesterday as part of their ongoing Russia probe. Anderson?
And when it comes to the case against Manafort and Rick Gates, what have you learned?
So we have learned about a whole slew of information that prosecutors have. They have 400,000 documents in their case against Gates and Manafort. They include things like financial records and emails, and prosecutors have even labeled 2,000 of the documents as, quote, hot, meaning that they could be particularly relevant. So also what the government has, they have 36 electronic devices that they seized from Paul Manafort's home back in July. Investigators have also issued 15 search warrants. And probably the most interesting thing, Anderson, in these filings is that the government referenced that Manafort and Gates have actually given deposition testimony in another matter. Prosecutors, though, they're not saying exactly what they mean. The case moving full steam ahead, and we'll see both Manafort and Gates back in court on Monday, Anderson.
All right, Jessica Schneider, thanks very much. Up next, a live update from Southern California, where wildfires have already forced nearly 200,000 people out of their homes. Could get worse over the weekend. I want to show you some live images right now from a helicopter from affiliate KABC over Ventura County, which is north of Los Angeles. The forecast, by the way, is not one that Southern California needs. Meteorologists say that dry air, strong winds through the weekend could add fuel to wildfires that have already forced nearly 200,000 people from their homes. The fires have burned almost 160,000 acres this week. Sarah Seidner joins us now with an update. Explain where you are and what's around you.
This is Ventura, the city of Ventura, and around me is simply devastation from the fire. The reason why we just got word that much of this city, almost all of it, the evacuation order is being lifted. I will show you why. It's actually a sad story, really, when you look at why. It's because the fuel for the fire is pretty much gone. There's just nothing to burn in some of these neighborhoods because it has already been burned to the ground. We looked around us in this one street and just below, and there were 20 homes we could see with the naked eye that were burned to the ground, just the chimneys standing very much like the house you are looking at now. That's on one street. We have gone street to street to street on this hill and seen the same kind of devastation on each street. And then every now and then you will have a street that nothing is burned. It is the way the fires work, but they are still raging. We are talking about a fire that is now 3 times the size of Washington, D.C., and it has not let up yet. That's 132,000 acres, which is about 200 square miles, that is burnt to a crisp. I also should mention those pictures you were just showing there of the helicopter shot. The best view of these is from the sky because as you see, some of this is burning in a very densely wooded area, and it's too dangerous to get up close to. And we've been in a situation, Anderson, where 101, that beautiful road that goes along the coast from here all the way up to LA, there was a point at which we had to pull over. Cars were swerving around fire as it jumped from one side of 101 to the other towards the ocean, where there are quite a few homes. Those homes did survive, though, Anderson.
That's incredible. I mean, I think last hour you were saying it's about 10% contained. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, and you imagine that 10%, when you're talking about this kind of a fire, this is going to take a long time to deal with. You talked about this very important fact that it is extremely dry. At one point, the dew point was in the negative. I didn't even know that was possible, which means there's no humidity. There's less humidity than they can possibly imagine. That is terrible for fighting a fire. And the winds kicked up at one point to about 70 miles an hour over the past couple of days. Now that red flag warning is what they call it, is extended. It was supposed to stop on Thursday. It is extended through Sunday. And so the big worry is, of course, the neighborhoods like this one, where there could be another round of evacuations and more fire. But for right now, the latest news here in Ventura, which has been hit the hardest with about 400 structures, many of them homes burned. Latest news is that the city of Ventura is saying, look, the evacuations for most people have now been lifted. One tiny bit of good news after so much devastation here in Southern California.
Yeah,
Anderson?
It's just incredible. Sarah Seidner, I appreciate you being there. Thank you. Up next, we have a sneak preview of the CNN special report, The Mystery of Michael Flynn. It's a fascinating look. Jim Sciutto joins me with a look at how Flynn went from military hero to pleading guilty for lying to the FBI. Before Michael Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI in the Russia probe, and before he was the national security advisor to President Trump, he was a military legend. Now he's at the center of the biggest political scandal in decades. Coming up in a few minutes, at the top of the hour, CNN Jim Sciutto investigates Flynn's downfall in a new special report. Jim joins me now with the preview. So your report is called The Mystery of Michael Flynn, and it takes a look at the life and the career of someone many people still really don't know very much about.
It's true, and the reason we chose mystery is because really the way he went after his time in the military, a distinguished career, really a heroic career, was something of a mystery to the people who knew him best and served with him, admired him, served under him, served for him, risked their lives together. Why did he take this turn when he went political, particularly among military folks? His going so supremely political, the locker up chants at the Republican convention, etc., was something that they felt was a step too far for someone who just came out of a uniform, but also a step beyond the Flynn that they knew when he was in uniform. It really was a mystery for a lot of the people who knew him best.
I understand there was an expression that some of Michael Flynn's colleagues used to describe his approach to intelligence.
That's right. I mean, particularly when he was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency after he left the military, one of the senior-most intelligence officials, they called these Flynn facts, and that was not a compliment. It was cases where Flynn went beyond, it seemed, the facts and the intelligence. And this is something we heard even from the man who hired him there, the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. Have a listen.
Inside the intelligence agencies, some grew concerned that Flynn's position sometimes contradicted the facts and the intelligence. Flynn facts, they called them.
People talked about Flynn facts. You've heard this expression.
I was hearing from more than one source in DIA about what became Flynn facts. That concerned me.
Can you give me an example?
I think he was convinced that the Iranians were behind the Benghazi attack, which they weren't. At least we had no evidence of that. But he insisted that he'd find evidence to back up that proposition.
The increasingly infamous Flynn facts became one symptom of broader concerns about Flynn's leadership at DIA.
Flynn started to manifest some of the more controversial behaviors that ultimately played out on the national stage.
And that issue arguably got bigger, particularly when he was on the campaign, because you had his comments, really some of his bigoted comments about Islam, the religion, saying it's not a religion, saying that people are right to be fearful of Muslims. And then you had him sharing on the campaign conspiracy theories, even that repeatedly debunked theory, really preposterous theory that Hillary Clinton and John Podesta had some sort of child sex ring at a pizza parlor here in D.C. So a lot of those trends got even worse in the view of the people who knew him best after he left the military.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. Jim Sciutto, thanks very much.
Thank you.
That does it for 360. The mystery. Evening, President Trump is expected to take the stage any moment now at the Base Center in Pensacola, Florida. The event is being billed as a Make America Great rally. However, in everything but name, it's expected to be a Make Roy Moore Senator rally. Roy Moore, of course, has been accused by several women of sexual abuse and assault, allegations he denies. The rally is taking place on the border with Alabama in a TV market shared with Mobile. Hundreds of thousands of Alabamians could see this live or on their local news tonight. And if there were any doubt at all about why this is happening just 4 days before the special election in Alabama, before leaving Washington, the president posted a long tweet that ends with "Vote Roy Moore." And for the president, tonight caps a journey that began with silence on Moore when the sex abuse and sex assault allegations first hit. Silence in part because, according to CNN reporting, there was concern that by endorsing Moore, the sexual assault claims against the president would resurface. But that caution was pretty quickly abandoned because the president began defending Moore's denials. Soon after that, Mr. Trump reportedly expressing doubts to confidants about the veracity of the accusers against Moore. In the midst of all of this, the president's daughter, by the way, said there was a, quote, special place in hell for people who prey on children. That clearly didn't stop the president from landing where he did today, full-throated acceptance. Vote Roy Moore, he tweeted. Tonight, the rally. Also ahead in an interview you'll only see here, a new voice coming forward, confirming one of the central accusers' account against Roy Moore. And later, new reporting tonight that the FBI warned close Trump campaign advisor Hope Hicks about emails from Russian operatives. We begin tonight with Caitlin Collins with the president in Pensacola. What can we expect from tonight's speech?
Well, Anderson, these rallies are often where the president is his most authentic self, and as you know, he rarely sticks to the script and often ignores whatever his aides have put in the teleprompter, and we're certainly expecting a lot of that tonight. Now, the White House has maintained time and time again that the president will not come to Alabama to campaign for Senate candidate Roy Moore, but he's getting about as close as you can get. We are a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Alabama state line, and if the president shouted from that stage tonight, you could probably hear it in Mobile. Now, the White House has also maintained that the president finds these allegations made against Roy Moore extremely troubling, and they repeated that same argument tonight as they flew here to Pensacola on Air Force One.
As he has said, and as the White House has said, we find these allegations to be troubling and concerning, and they should be taken seriously. Roy Moore has also maintained that these allegations aren't true, and that should also be taken into account. Ultimately, his endorsement is about the issues and how he has articulated he doesn't want to see Alabama elect a Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer puppet who's going to be wrong on the issues and not support the agenda.
Now, Anderson, we know privately that sources say the president actually doubts the women who have accused Roy Moore of sexual assault, and he's publicly asked why they waited so long to come forward with these accusations. We also know that the president has compared this situation to his own last year during the presidential election when he himself was accused of sexual assault. Now, Roy Moore will not be in this room tonight, but I've already spoken with a number of people here tonight who are Alabama residents. They are voting in the election on Tuesday, and we know that the Moore campaign, Anderson, is actively encouraging their supporters to attend this rally in Pensacola tonight.
And Caitlin, one of Roy Moore's accusers spoke out today. What did she say?
Beverly Nelson is a woman who says when she was 16 years old that Roy Moore tried to grope her and squeezed her neck. And today during a press conference, she was talking about that yearbook. Roy Moore signed her yearbook, she says, and that's something that a lot of her critics and his supporters have said is a forgery. Now, her attorney, Gloria Allred, says a handwriting expert has determined that the signature is Roy Moore's. But what really people seized upon today was Beverly Nelson saying that she did add the date and the location underneath that inscription. She maintained that Roy Moore signed her yearbook. She maintains that the allegations she's made against him are true, but that his campaign and his supporters have seized upon that and saying that it's a forgery and that she admitted that she was lying, which she did not, Anderson. But we've certainly seen that come out of that. And she says that although she voted for Donald Trump, she believes that the president is now putting party over these allegations, Anderson.
All right, Caitlin Collins, thanks very much. Joining us now is CNN political analyst David Gergen and Gloria Borger, also Bill Britt, editor-in-chief of the Alabama Political Reporter. David Gergen, President Trump, really going in, obviously all now for Roy Moore. Do you believe his presence is going to have an impact on this race?
Yes, I think it might. I think they went in with the expectation that if they could rally people in Pensacola, and this is Trump country that he's in, he'll have a very excited, positive crowd there with him tonight that will rub off in a sense of they have momentum. So I think he's making a political calculation. His team is making a political calculation, but whether it's enough to pull the victory out, I don't know. But it is clearly, I think he's taking a great risk to the party itself. With the Democrats like Al Franken going down and then going and endorsing Roy Moore in the midst of all of these accusations by a lot of women that he's a pedophile and was a predator, and throwing his support to him, only sharpens the differences between the parties.
Bill, I mean, you know Alabama politics very well. It's where you work and focus on them. What kind of an impact do you think the president can have tonight?
Well, the president's very popular here in Alabama, and Pensacola might as well be South Alabama for all intents and purposes. He's very popular. When he came here for Luther Strange, it moved the needle a little bit, but not enough. This will help Roy Moore because it gives those people that are on the fence a reason to vote for Moore.
Gloria, I mean, if this might be, it might as well be Alabama, as Bill was just saying, why not just go to Alabama? I mean, I know when they announced this trip, President Trump hadn't fully endorsed Moore, but he has now.
He has now. Look, on November 27th, the White House said that the president was too busy, that he wasn't going to go to Alabama. And now, of course, they've changed their minds, so they're being kind of cute, and they're in Pensacola, which, as you guys have pointed out, is exactly the same thing. I think the president now thinks that Roy Moore has a really good shot at winning, and he thinks that the seat is worth more than just about anything, including the Republican Party, and the question of how the Republican Party survives generally, having embraced, having a president who embraces Roy Moore, given the sexual questions that are confronting him. And so I think Trump decided himself to go all in on this, even though it's right across the border.
You know, Bill, when you and I spoke last time on this show, you were saying that, you'd heard from some Republicans in Alabama who were just maybe going to sit it out, who didn't support Roy Moore. They weren't going to vote for a Democrat. They were just going to sit on the sidelines, not go out to vote. I'm wondering, do you think the president being all in on this in the way that he is, that will influence any of those Republicans who might previously have just decided to sit this one out?
I think it does. Roy Moore has always been a polarizing figure in Alabama. I mean, he is not what we would call mainstream Republican here, although he has been a Republican for most of his career. Donald Trump, again, I have to reiterate, he's very popular. There are Republicans that we have spoken to, and some in leadership throughout the state, that say, look, they don't really want to vote for Moore. They're not going to vote for a Democrat. So this gives them a reason to get up and go out on December 12th and vote, because they're going to say, the president's behind him, I'm behind the president.
Yeah, this is about turnout. This is usually these kinds of elections don't get a lot of people motivated to go out and vote, and that's one thing I think Donald Trump can do. But I got to tell you, there was a Fox News poll in mid-November which had Donald Trump's favorable and unfavorable almost split in the state, which kind of surprised me.
David, I mean, it's not just Donald Trump now who's all in with Roy Moore. The RNC had basically reversed themselves. They had stopped funding. Then once the president came out with an endorsement, they started sending money in back to Roy Moore.
Well, that's absolutely right. And what it underscores is the Republican Party is increasingly becoming the Trump Party, and it's leaving a lot of Republicans uncomfortable, especially those other kinds of states outside the South. But I think that Gloria was absolutely right. He thinks that getting the seat is worth it. What I do think is too cute by half is this notion, well, I'm not going to go to Alabama, but yet I'm going to come right to the border. And, I support Roy Moore, but I really think that we must take these accusations very seriously. I think his supporters don't mind that kind of trickery, but it drives people like us crazy. Because we see, well, it's obviously, you're obviously going to Alabama country to make your speech. Come on, get over it. You're obviously endorsing this guy, even though you say you find him troublesome.
Gloria. If he's in Alabama, he's got to have a picture with Roy Moore. Because you can't go to the guy's state without the picture. The picture is going to be worth a lot of money to the Democrats. So what he's doing is he's going to Florida because he said he wasn't going to go to Alabama. So he doesn't have to be with Roy Moore on stage, but the message is the same and it gets across.
And Bill, I mean, what about Doug Jones? What about kind of the level of support you're saying? I mean, obviously, you know, Alabama should go to a Republican in a Senate race. The fact that it's close is very telling. But what do you make of Doug Jones's chances?
Well, I've spoken to a lot of people, Democrats, Republicans, independents, people on the ground here in Alabama. And while Doug Jones did something heroic 30-some years ago, he has not been a leading political figure in Alabama at any point in recent memory. And so, sadly, I had to say today, this was the Democrat that was willing to lose to Luther Strange. And then that didn't happen. We know what happened there. Doug Jones is a nice guy. He's a good liberal Democrat, and liberal Democrats just don't win in Alabama. But he does have a real shot here.
David Gergen, Gloria Borger, Bill Britt, appreciate it. We're keeping our eye on the rally, but we're going to get a quick break in. Also, when we come back, Gary Tuchman's exclusive. For the first time, an old friend of Lee Korfman's comes forward on camera to tell the story that Ms. Korfman told her when they were both 14 years old about what Lee Korfman says happened with Roy Moore. Later, another report detailing Russian efforts, it seems, to reach out to the Trump campaign. The target this time, Trump confidant Hope Hicks, will tell you how seriously the FBI took it at the time. President now on stage in Pensacola, Florida. We'll be listening in, bring you the highlights as they come in. In the meantime, a new angle on the Roy Moore allegations. First, we should say there are no simple generalizations to be made about survivors of sexual abuse. Each person's experiences and processes it in her or in his own way. However, it's safe to say anything they've gone through is only compounded when their account of what, after all, was their nightmare is questioned. In the case of Roy Moore's accusers, loudly, publicly, and repeatedly.
Let's look at Lee Korfman. She's made some serious allegations against Judge Moore to the Washington Post and yesterday in a very softball interview on the Today Show. We reject them as false, and we continue to maintain that Judge Moore did not know Lee Korfman, nor has he ever known Lee Korfman. But what we find interesting is that her story has been told in only the vaguest of terms without any deeper investigation by the media. If the liberal media were half as interested in investigating these accusations against Judge Moore as they are in scaring up 1980s era false gossip at the Gadsden Mall, then we would be getting to the bottom of this and moving on. We urge the press to do its job.
Well, now, under the heading of the press doing its job, we have this story tonight. Our Gary Tuchman has located a woman, an old friend of Korfman's, who says she can corroborate her story and is speaking out on camera for the first time tonight.
Betsy Rutenberg Davis lives in California, but grew up in Gadsden, Alabama, the hometown of Judge Roy Moore.
This is me up here, and almost directly below me is Lee, right here.
Lee Korfman, the woman who says Roy Moore sexually abused her when she was a 14-year-old girl, an allegation that Moore denies. Betsy Davis is one of the two friends Korfman has said she told at the time.
Lee and I grew up together. I've known her since we were babies.
She confided in you about something when she was 14 years old and you were 14 years old.
Yes.
What did she tell you?
She told me that she snuck out of her house and went on a date with Roy Moore, and he had sexually assaulted her.
After she told you this, what was your understanding of who Roy Moore was in the community? What did you think he was?
He was he was a big lawyer. He was a powerful guy. He was supposed to put criminals in jail.
And did she tell you, Lee, how old he was?
I knew he was a lot older. I mean, I don't know that she said that he was 32, but I knew that he was like more than twice her age.
What did she tell you that he did to her?
I remember her saying that he made a pallet on the floor, maybe with blankets, something like that. And I remember her saying that he came out of his room in nothing but tighty-whities, which is what we used to call jockey underwear.
And what happened then?
They started to fool around, and he guided her to, it's like he was trying to teach her what to do, and she didn't want any part of it, and she told him so.
Is it your memory that when she told you about it, she was scared or didn't understand what was going on?
I wouldn't use scared, but definitely creeped out.
So when she told you this, what did you say to her?
I said, you cannot see him again. This is not good. He's too old for you. You're too young for him. You've got your life ahead of you. You know, you've got to go to college and you got to, you know, live your life.
Were you mature enough at 14 to realize how debilitating psychologically, mentally this could be for a 14-year-old child to be with a man who was over 30 years old?
I don't think I understood that, but what my mother had always said to me and drilled it into my head was, you know, in terms of sex, men take what they want and it's always the woman's fault. And I knew that if she went down this path, she was going to be blamed and she was the one that was going to be left and it wasn't going to affect him at all. So I told her, she was my friend, get out. This is no good.
He was asking her to go out again?
That's my understanding, yes.
And she was asking you her advice how she should handle it?
Yeah. I was like, just no, absolutely not.
After she told you about this, what happened on the floor, on this mattress or whatever it was, did you discuss it all telling any adults, your parents, about what happened?
I'm not sure that we discussed it, but I know that we knew that we weren't going to tell anybody.
Why is that?
We felt like we were equipped to handle it. We had decided that it wasn't a good idea, nobody wanted to get in trouble, and we didn't know if anybody would believe us.
Betsy Davis and her husband, Charlie, live in Los Angeles and are the parents of 2 boys. He says he's known about this for a long time.
When did your wife first tell you about this?
Well, shortly after I met my wife, I met Lee Korfman on our visit to Gadsden. And from that time on, I knew that she had had an incident. But I didn't know who Roy Moore was in the beginning, but that all came out over time.
And how many years ago was that you first found out?
19 years.
Betsy Davis says she is a Democrat, but...
I'm not here to tear Roy Moore down. I'm here to hold my friend up.
And regarding unproven allegations that women speaking out against Roy Moore are doing it for money...
Did anyone page you to talk to us? Any Democrats?
God, no.
Any members of the news media?
No.
Any establishment Republicans?
No, and I ran. I cannot tell you how many phone calls I've declined, how many messages I haven't returned.
So why are you talking to us now?
Because at the end of the day, I need to set example for my kids. And one of those examples is to stand up for the truth and to stand up for my friend.
Kara Tuchman joins us now. Betsy Davis says she's known about this for almost 4 decades. Has she ever considered speaking publicly about what she says she knew prior to this Washington Post article?
Well, understand what Betsy Davis tells me is that as Roy Moore has gotten more publicly prominent, she has felt this ethical obligation to speak out. But Lee Korfman wasn't ready, and she realized by her speaking out with an anonymous victim, it wouldn't do any good. However, this year, when Roy Moore announced he was running for the U.S. Senate seat, she said, I have to do it. I have to speak out. The time has come. She talked to a close family friend who said, you should not do it. This is not your story. And then, though, when Lee Korfman spoke out, she realized it was time for her to speak out, too.
All right, Kara Tuchman, thanks very much. Back now with Bill Britt. Bill, at this point in Alabama, I mean, you know, look, this election is on Tuesday. Do you think people's minds are made up, no matter who, you know, at this point, this woman, an old friend of Lee Korfman's coming forward, no matter who comes forward?
Well, I think at this point, you're probably right. Minds are fairly set. I mean, one more corroboration, you know, I think it helps that those who are sitting on the fence, it may help them make a decision. But I think at this point, the die is cast. We'll know sometime around probably 9 o'clock your time what's going to happen to the state of Alabama and to Roy Moore and Doug Jones.
You know, polls are obviously showing it's close, but as we know in polls, in sometimes if there's controversial candidates, people don't really want to say if they are going to vote for that person. Do you think Roy Moore? Do you think it's as close as it looks, or do you think Roy Moore has a good lead?
I've talked to some folks a lot smarter than me, and they say that it's within the margin of error the way they see it. However, we have also talked to people who have traveled the state. Our reporters, you know, we've got 8 reporters on the ground. They have been going to Republican meetings across the state, and they say that when you go to a Republican meeting, they're voting for Moore. And the question is, much like what Gloria said, who gets up December 12th, right before the holidays, and goes vote? Roy Moore supporters are going to go vote. You know, he's got a diehard 30-35%, and they will get up, hell or high water, and go to the ballot and cast their vote for Roy Moore. So it's just too close to call gauging by polls. I mean, you know what we saw with President Trump when he was running? I wouldn't predict right now. If I had to, held a gun to my head, I'd say more sweet spot.
It's an interesting point that you make, though, about sort of that enthusiasm. You know, who has more enthusiasm on their side? And I guess the question is, you know, as you say, Roy Moore's supporters are enthusiastic and die hard in their beliefs for him, about 35% or so, and they want to go out. They're going to go out and vote. Question is there enthusiasm on the other side, A, for Doug Jones, or enough enthusiasm against Roy Moore?
I don't think there's that great enthusiasm for Doug Jones. I mean, I like Doug, but just like me, he's another aging white guy that, you know, somebody wants to go to Washington. And so there's little enthusiasm. You know, we've got some powerful young progressives down here who, if they were in this seat right now, they'd probably be killing because there's enthusiasm. You look at what happened in Birmingham with the new mayor there, or look at Selma and the mayor that's just turning that city around. I mean, we have some great leaders coming out of the South. They just didn't get the shot because they didn't want to take it against probably losing. No one knew this was coming.
Yeah. Phil Britt, appreciate it again. Thanks very much. More now from our own political panel, Jack Kingston, Brian Fallon, and Tara Setmayer. Tara, I mean, the fact that one of Roy Moore's accusers admitted to altering the yearbook entry in which she says he signed, adding the date and location of when and where he signed it, I'm wondering how damaging do you think is that to her credibility, if you think it is?
Well, I think it just gives fuel to the Roy Moore supporters and those that scream fake news. I mean, it's part of the echo chamber of people down there. I don't think it's going to change those who are already suspicious of Roy Moore. I just think it emboldens those who are already behind him. It doesn't change the content of the message or the fact that he actually did write in her yearbook. He signed it, Love Roy. I just wish that she would have disclosed at the time that she had added the date and the location. I don't think that's an unreasonable annotation to add to a yearbook signing like that, so that you have it in contemporaneously at the time or whenever she did it, so she could remember. But unfortunately, given the big deal that was made and the very emotional press conference that she had when she was describing it, I think it would have been better if they would have admitted it at the time. But I don't think it's going to change the needle either way. It's just going to give fodder to the side that's already in Roy Moore's corner, unfortunately.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, to Tara's point, if she is telling the truth, it's kind of a huge oversight for her, but especially for her attorney, Gloria Allred, not to have raised that initially and just said this other stuff was added in, because anytime you make a statement and then you have to come back a second time and kind of alter the original statement you made, it just doesn't help your credibility.
Agreed, and that's the unfortunate reality here. I agree with everything Tara said. It doesn't discredit this woman's account in my eyes, but it will certainly be used as fuel for Roy Moore's supporters who operate in complete bad faith. And I'll tell you another thing that Roy Moore's supporters and Donald Trump supporters will probably say should Roy Moore prevail in this election next Tuesday. They'll say that, well, this issue was aired, it was litigated in the course of the campaign, the voters in Alabama have spoken, and now he's going to take his rightful seat in the Senate. And I'll make a prediction. I don't think that's going to be the case, even if he should win on Tuesday. And I don't know exactly how close it is down there in Alabama, but should he win, I think he'll come to Washington and he will be a walking, talking disaster, PR disaster for the Republican Party. He will be stopped in the halls of the Senate day after day. He will be a walking controversy every day. These Republican senators that have taken positions in the course of this campaign saying he doesn't belong in the Senate and that there should be an ethics committee process if he gets here will be held to their word. And I think that, and he's a nut job. Even before these allegations came to light, he said that people like Keith Ellison shouldn't be in Congress because we shouldn't have Muslim Americans in Congress. This week he said that the United States was at its best during the slavery period. So he's going to be continuing to add fuel to the fire. I think this is going to be a nightmare for the Republican Party. He should be held to account, and Tuesday should not be the final word on Roy Moore as a senator, even if he should prevail.
Jack, I know you actually campaigned for his opponent Luther Strange, who did not win. Roy Moore did win in that primary. Do you think it's going to have ramifications for the Republican Party, if assuming he wins?
I think it will. I think Brian's right. There's going to be kind of a double gift. He's a gift to the Democrats as a candidate because he's certainly a flawed candidate, but I think he would be a gift if he got elected. And I'm just speaking politically here.
Sure.
You know, if I was the Democrat Party, I would say, oh, do you think he has a right to greet a head of state? Do you think he has a right to vote on this particular bill that affects women's rights or children's rights? So the Democrats are not going to let this go, and I don't think Republicans would either if the shoe was on the other foot. I do want to say something, though, Anderson. I spoke to some people from Alabama today, and they agreed with what Bill Britt just said, is that, in their opinion, the polls aren't necessarily telling the story. The polls are showing a really strong win for Roy Moore at this time, but I think there are a lot of discerning people who are having second thoughts about it. And one of the factors that's out there is that Mr. Jones is on the TV nonstop. And although the Republican Party has of lately put in money, it was, I think, a total of $170,000. I think Jones is outspending him 3 or 4 to 1. In fact, one of my friends said it looks like Ohio or Florida in a presidential election, a swing state with all the ads that Jones is able to run. So I don't know. You know, if the rural voters get out, it's going to help more, but we're not certain what that intensity is.
Right. We're going to take a quick break. Brian Fallon mentioned some of the other things that Roy Moore has said that has caused controversy. We'll talk more about that ahead. Also tonight, the latest reporting from the New York Times on the warning the FBI gave White House advisor Hope Hicks earlier this year about Russian operatives. The president talking tonight in Pensacola, right by the Alabama border, pointing to improvement in the economy, good numbers on jobs today, certainly. Also railing against the media, the Washington swamp. So far, nothing yet about Roy Moore. We're just 4 days from the U.S. Senate race in Alabama. The president has endorsed the Republican contender. This morning, as we mentioned, he tweeted, "Vote Roy Moore." As a reminder, even before any sexual assault allegations came out against Mr. Moore, he'd publicly held a number of controversial positions. In March 2005, in a TV interview, Moore said homosexual conduct should be illegal and equated it to bestiality. Just this past February, he suggested 9/11 might have happened because the U.S. had distanced itself from God, saying, you know, we've suffered a lot in this country, maybe, just maybe, because we've distanced ourselves from the one that has it within his hands to heal this land. Back in September 2016, on whether President Obama was born in the United States, he said this: "My personal belief is that he wasn't, but that's probably over and done in a few days unless we get something else to come along." In December 2006, Moore argued that the first Muslim elected to Congress, Keith Ellison, shouldn't be allowed to be sworn into office using the Quran. Moore wrote, quote, "In 1943, we would never have allowed a member of Congress to take their oath on Mein Kampf, or someone in the 1950s to swear allegiance to the Communist Manifesto. Congress has the authority and should act to prohibit Ellison from taking the congressional oath today." This past August 14th, he told a reporter, quote, "There are communities under Sharia law right now in our country." Also this August, he told a reporter that President Reagan's description of the Soviet Union as the focus of evil in the modern world could be applied to America today because, quote, "we promote a lot of bad things like same-sex marriage." Finally, on September 17th, in response to a question from an African-American at a rally, Moore said he thought the last time America was great was, quote, "at the time when families were united. Even though we had slavery, they cared for one another." Moore added, "Our families were strong. Our country had a direction." Back now with the panel. You know, Jack, it is interesting given all that Moore has said, and Moore has said, and again, you were campaigning for Luther Strange, so you're not out in front for Roy Moore. But given all that he said, it doesn't seem he has sort of stayed away from, other than that comment about slavery, he's stayed away from repeating any of those statements, it seems like, in recent months. And every time, you know, when we had a spokeswoman on just the other day, she either wasn't willing to or was unable to say whether he still stood by those statements.
You know, it was interesting. I saw your interview with her, and I was wondering, does she not know, or is she staying on message by not saying anything at all? And one of the things that strikes me on these statements is I think most politicians would love to catch their opponents saying outrageous things and just pound them over and over again. I don't think Jones has done that. I think Jones should have been developing this thing and say, look, you have this guy has pedophile issues. But beyond that, let me talk to you about some other things. And I don't think Jones developed that the way that he could. And instead, I think what has happened is more stuck with this is about Supreme Court judges. This is about pro-life versus pro-choice. This is about pro-gun versus anti-gun. And I think that, unfortunately, that's the home turf for Alabama voters. And Jones did not pull them into this other area, which I think he should have done and been working on it a month ago.
You know, Brian, if Roy Moore does win this Tuesday, is it paradoxically a victory for Democrats? I mean, or something that helps Democrats, something that they hang their hat on? Because one could see how this could be political fodder for them, at least through the midterms, if not the next presidential election. At some point, there's going to be a photograph of President Trump. You know, if Roy Moore becomes the senator, there's going to be a photograph of them together.
Well, I think I speak for most Democrats when I say I'd much rather win the election next Tuesday and have another Democratic senator in Mr. Jones than try to score a longer-term victory by allowing Roy Moore to ascend to a U.S. Senate seat. But if he does win, should he win, and should he get to Washington, I think that the Democrats will be on strong footing in arguing that this is the mainstreaming of Trump's wing of the Republican Party taking over the GOP. This is not your father's Republican Party anymore. And a lot of the statements and most controversial things that have come out of Roy Moore are really a lot of Trump's positions just taken to their logical extreme. When Donald Trump goes out and campaigns on a Muslim ban, preventing Muslims from entering the country and trying to stoke that Islamophobia in the United States, when Roy Moore comes out, he's just even more unabashed and says he doesn't think that they should be allowed to serve in the United States Congress. So it will be quite easy for Democrats to campaign in even Republican-leaning districts in Orange County, California, in the outer ring suburbs outside Philadelphia, in suburban New Jersey, where a lot of these Republicans are in moderate districts, and say that, are you going to vote to put a Republican back into Congress so that they can carry out the Trump-Roy Moore agenda? That will be a very credible line of attack, and it'll ring true, I think, even to moderate and Republican-leaning voters.
Tara, are you surprised at the extent to which the president has gone all in on Roy Moore? Because, you know, he was overseas when these allegations first surfaced, you know, said, look, his people said he was focused on his trip overseas, wasn't, you know, read in on all the stuff that was going on. But once he came back and you know, some time went by, he clearly became more focused on it and ultimately is all in on Moore.
I think they were waiting to see whether Roy Moore pushed back and whether he had a credible defense, which most people outside of Alabama and the White House felt as though he has not. But we have to step back and take a look at this. Am I surprised that Trump ended up endorsing him? No, because if Donald Trump criticized Roy Moore for what he's accused of and for how he's handling it, then that would inherently be hypocritical in his point, given the accusations against him. So it would be a tacit concession in a way. So there's no way that Donald Trump was going to condemn Roy Moore in any way, because it would be turned around on him. And let's just think about that. Right now, we have someone who is a lying lunatic, credibly accused child predator, with the endorsement of the President of the United States and the Republican National Committee. This is a sad day for not only America, but for the Republican Party. And no matter what happens on Tuesday, whether Roy Moore wins or not, the stain of this will be on the Republicans' cloth for a long time, and it's not a win for anyone. And the Republican Party needs to seriously take a look at itself and determine what kind of party we want to be, because I can already see the ads going on in 2018. Every Democrat can associate Republicans with Roy Moore, and what are we going to say? What moral high ground do we have?
But one thing, remember, Tara, that what will also happen is we'll resurrect all the crazy things a lot of your candidates have said, and so I don't know that that's really going to move the needle.
She's a Republican.
I'm a Republican,
well,
Jack.
Forgot,
what are you
Tara.
talking about?
I'm sorry. Well,
yeah, you forgot
Democrat
because conservatives and Republicans have lost their freaking minds and don't remember what it means
Tara,
to be a real
I know
Republican
that's how you feel
and
about
compromise
the party,
themselves.
but I'm just saying both parties have their extreme candidates. I would not just say that the lying lunatic fringe belongs to anybody.
Well, right now, the Democrats don't have a child predator on their list. They've gotten, at least they've taken the high ground and gotten rid of some of theirs, their accusers.
They had to,
perhaps
Tara.
it's politically expedient, but at least they did it.
All right.
Better late than never. Right now, Republicans are at
Conyers
never.
was an icon a week ago. Remember that.
And he resigned.
By Nancy Pelosi's
Tara
own words.
Jack Kingston, Brian Fallon, thanks very much. When we come back, the breaking news from the New York Times about one of President Trump's top advisors, Hope Hicks, what warning the FBI gave her about Russian operations trying to contact her next. We're getting word tonight that the FBI warned President Trump's communication director, Hope Hicks, about Russian operatives who tried to make contact with her during the presidential transition. Now, this is reporting from the New York Times. CNN Justice correspondent Jessica Schneider joins us now with more. So what was the FBI warning?
Well, Anderson, this was earlier this year, and senior FBI officials, they cautioned Hope Hicks about several introductory emails she received after the election from Russian government email addresses. Now, FBI agents, they met with Hope Hicks twice inside the Situation Room at the White House, and they told her that these emails, they weren't what they seemed, and that they may have been part of a Russian intelligence operation. All of that is according to the New York Times. Now, this was a very specific warning, and it shows that law enforcement was really alarmed that the Russians were still trying to establish contacts with the Trump team even after the election. And Anderson, we know that Hope Hicks, she disclosed her meetings with the FBI to White House counsel Don McGahn. And we also know that Hicks met with special counsel's team, the Robert Mueller's team, today and yesterday as part of their Russia probe.
What more are you learning about the case against Paul Manafort and Rick Gates?
Well, prosecutors now disclosing all of their findings here. They have 400,000 documents in this case against Manafort, against Gates. They include financial records, emails, and they've labeled 2,000 of those documents as, quote, hot, meaning that they may be particularly relevant. So the government also has disclosed that it has 36 electronic devices. Those were seized from Paul Manafort's home. And investigators in this case have also issued in total 15 search warrants. And Anderson, this part is interesting. In the court filings today, the government referenced that Manafort and Gates, they have also given deposition testimony in another matter, but prosecutors, they aren't saying exactly what that means. But this case is moving full steam ahead. The next status hearing for Manafort and Gates, Anderson, it's Monday.
Jessica Schneider, appreciate it. Thanks very much. Joining me now, CNN legal analyst Michael Zeldin, who is Robert Mueller's special assistant at the Justice Department. With us again is CNN chief political analyst Gloria Borger. So, Michael, the fact that, according to this reporting by the New York Times, the FBI briefed Hope Hicks about these efforts by Russian operatives to contact her, what does that tell you?
Well, it means that the Russians were, as our intelligence agencies have reported for months, actively engaged with the Trump campaign or endeavoring to engage with the Trump campaign in order to sway the outcome of the election and also to, once they were elected, to help set policy. And we see that in the Flynn outreach around sanctions and the settlements in Israel. And so it just proves in part that there was this outreach. I think our reporting is that we had 12 Trump associates with contacts with Russia during the campaign or transition, 19 face-to-face meetings, 51 communications between Russians or Russian representatives and campaign or transitions officials. So it's a lot of contact here, and Hope Hicks is just another person who has been reached out to. We have to say, of course, that we have no indication that she did anything wrong. Yeah. And in fact, we're told that she went to see Don McGahn, the White House counsel, to report the FBI briefings, not the communications themselves, but the briefings. So she maybe have a good legal place to land. But I think, Anderson, you can't deny that there was an outreach, and in some respects, there was a reach back by the campaign to these Russians or Russian surrogates. And it's something that Mueller's going to have to figure out whether it was illegal and a conspiracy to impact the Federal Election Commission. Yeah. Or not.
Yeah, Gloria, I think Michael's point is an important one to stress, that nothing in this reporting by the New York Times indicates that Hicks did anything improper at all. It is clear, though, these Russian operatives were trying to get as close as they could to the president by reaching out to, obviously, one of his closest confidants.
Sure. Look, Hope Hicks is somebody who was in the campaign, in the transition, and her office is right outside the Oval Office. She's close to the president. She's a confidant of the president. She's at the center of a lot of meetings. She is somebody who's a trusted advisor. And I think that, it might also indicate, by the way, how clumsy they are, to be honest. I mean, here they were trying to infiltrate perhaps through people like George Papadopoulos, who has been called a coffee boy by people inside the campaign. And it seems to me that there was this kind of never-ending effort to try and get inside. I think sending Hope Hicks emails is kind of a weird way to do it, as if she would respond in kind to these things, but we don't know. And again, as you point out, there's no indication she's done anything wrong, but there is an indication, at least according to the FBI, that she may have been a target of some Russians trying to get some influence in this administration.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, Anderson, to Gloria's point, though, you wouldn't have expected Donald Trump Jr. to entertain a call from WikiLeaks. Nor from Ron Goldstock to get a meeting on dirt. And so if that's the standard that's been set, or if that's the level of the bar, then maybe they reach out to Hope Hicks to see whether she's in the Don Jr. camp or some other camp.
Michael, I mean, Hicks was reportedly interviewed today and yesterday by Mueller's team. I would imagine they want to get to the bottom of exactly who crafted that Trump Tower meeting statement, since Donald Trump Jr. just told investigators that he communicated with her and not the president about that response.
That's right. In some sense, if all roads lead to Rome, as the expression goes, in some sense, Hope Hicks is Rome. So much stuff goes through her as the conduit between outsiders and the president that she really sits in a particularly important seat for Mueller. With respect to the Air Force One memo, the testimony that Jr. just gave on the 6th of December was that as they were crafting the response to the June 9th meeting, he was communicating with Hope Hicks, who was communicating with his father, who was then communicating back to Trump Jr. and his lawyer, so they could create a statement which, as it turned out, was not truthful.
Yeah, Gloria Borger, thank you. Michael Zeldin as well. Coming up, the latest on 6 large wildfires that are ripping through Southern California. Nearly 200,000 people have had to leave their homes so far. We'll get an update next. More than 5,000 firefighters are trying to get 6 large wildfires under control in Southern California. The weather not expected to help matters this weekend, unfortunately. Dry air, strong winds are in the forecast through Sunday. Fires have already forced nearly 200,000 people out of their homes. Officials are saying everyone else in the region needs to be ready. Even hundreds of thoroughbreds, some of them elite racehorses, were caught up in the flames. These horses were set free from their barns so they could actually escape. Trainers reported hearing the animals scream as they ran away. It's hard to imagine. Sarah Seidner joins us live now with more on the firefight. What's happening where you are, Sarah?
Yeah, terrible images here. This is after the fire has burned through the city of Ventura. This particular neighborhood hit so hard, I counted 20 homes around me that have been burned to the ground. There are 400 homes in this fire, homes and structures that have been destroyed, 85 that have been damaged. And we have certainly been hearing stories of people running literally for their lives, trying to get out of the path of the fire. Some people heeded the warnings. Others decided to wait a bit, and that waiting very, very dangerous. But so far, we have not gotten a single account of a fatality yet from fire officials. That is the good news, if you will. But for many of the folks here, they're just devastated looking at their neighborhoods where house after house after house has been burned to the ground. I can give you some quick numbers. You talked about 5,000 fire personnel across Southern California. 3,200 of that personnel is here in this county alone. 21 helicopters trying to douse these flames that are still raging, Anderson. It is a scary sight when you see that flame rolling down the hills as it has been doing, going both down some hills and up others, getting very, very close to the city, for example, of Ojai today. They were able to battle it back, but this has been extremely dangerous, and there is so much destruction. It will be a huge, costly figure once this is all done.
Yeah,
Anderson?
can you talk to me about containment? How much of this fire is contained?
Only 10%. And that's the good news. They thought that they were going to be dealing with a 0% again because the Santa Ana winds have been so strong. But today, those winds subsided a bit. But as you know, these fires, because they're so large and so incredibly powerful, they create their own weather systems and can just roll through areas. But they are still at just 10%. They think that this could burn through the end of December, something like the 24th, potentially right before Christmas.
That's
Anderson?
just incredible. Sarah Seidner, thanks very much. Coming up, the latest from Pensacola, Florida, where the president is speaking tonight at a campaign-style rally after endorsing accused sex offender Roy Moore for Senate.
In the House, we need...
In this hour, President Trump's campaign rally for Roy Moore in everything but name, Pensacola, Florida, just across the Alabama state line in the Mobile, Alabama TV market, just 4 days before the election. The president tweeting his support for the man several women have now accused of sexual abuse or sexual assault, allegations that he, of course, denies, lending his support on stage as well.
We cannot afford, this country, the future of this country, cannot afford to lose a seat in the very, very close United States Senate. We can't afford it, folks. We can't. We can't afford to have a liberal Democrat who is completely controlled by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. We can't do it. Can't do it. His name is Jones, and he's their total puppet, and everybody knows it. He will never, ever vote for us. We need somebody in that Senate seat who will vote for our Make America Great Again.
Just some of what the president talked about tonight. Here's actually, let's check in with Alex Marquardt for more. Alex, what more have we been hearing?
Well, Anderson, this is really what so many here in this crowd came out to hear, the president's support for Roy Moore. Now, it took the president quite a while to get to that. This was billed as a campaign-style speech, and it has held true to that. You can see up there next to the podium, next to the president, there are those signs that say Merry Christmas. The president came right out of the gate blasting political correctness like we've heard him do so many times on the campaign trail before, and then he just launched into what he has seen as many of his accomplishments over the past 10 months, including the economy, strengthening the military, and strengthening immigration control. Now, this was perceived in the days leading up to this rally to be a rally for Roy Moore as well. It's not lost on anybody where we are right now. Pensacola, Florida, this panhandle is all but Alabama. We're about 20-minute drive from the state line. In fact, anybody who's watching this speech on local TV tonight here in Florida is doing the same across the border in Alabama because they share that TV market. So the Moore campaign was very eager for their supporters and their volunteers to come out here to this rally tonight. The judge, we should note, Judge Roy Moore is not here at this rally. But just to show you how this was a not so subtle wink at the fact that this rally tonight is doubling as a Roy Moore rally, the daughter-in-law of the president, Laura Trump, so the wife of Eric Trump, recorded a robocall that went out to a large swath of Alabama voters, some hundreds of miles away, saying that in your area, the president is coming to visit, encouraging people to come here. Now, of course, the big question: if the president is going to endorse Roy Moore in the way that he has so vocally, not just here on stage today, but also saying in a tweet this morning, vote for Roy Moore, then why not just go to Alabama and campaign with him? And there are a couple answers. One, that this is a very tight race. There's a decent chance that next Tuesday that Moore could lose. But at the same time, if Moore wins, then Democrats could, of course, use those images of the president alongside an accused child molester in campaign ads next year in the 2018 races. Anderson?
Yeah, Alex Marquardt, thanks very much for that. We got some video now, just a small sample of what the president has been talking about over the last 30 or so minutes. Let's take a look.
Look, it's being proven we have a rigged system. Doesn't happen so easy. But this system, going to be a lot of changes. This is a rigged system. This is a sick system from the inside. And, there's no country like our country, but we have a lot of sickness in some of our institutions, and we're working very hard. We've got a lot of them straightened out, but we really do. We have a rigged system in this country, and we have to change it. Terrible. Terrible. They're resisting progress. They're resisting change. Not only are we defeating these killers, these savage killers, horrible, horrible, you don't even want to say people. These are savage killers over there, but we sure as hell don't want them to come over here. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You know, they come back to some countries and they come in. We're making it a very difficult process. We had such weakness. They go out, kill people, then they come back and they go back home to mom and dad. Okay? Before they went nutso and start over here. We're making it very difficult. You see what's being happened. We're watching every single one. We have thousands of people right now under surveillance. Slow surveillance. That sounds familiar. That sounds familiar. Remember when I suggested something like that? Everyone said, Trump? Why is he said? Well, it turned out I was right about that one, wasn't I? But they call themselves the resistance. You ever see these signs? Resist, resist. I love these guys. Look at these guys. Blacks for Trump. I love you. I love you. I love you. By the way, now that you bring it up, black home ownership just hit the highest level it's ever been in the history of our country. Congratulations. Oh, these resistors resist. Hillary resisted, and you know what happened? She lost the election in a landslide. But you know what they're really resisting? They're resisting the will of the American people. That's what they're resisting. And by the way, how are your 401ks doing? Not too bad, right? Over the weekend, I was in New York City, and I love to say hello to our folks in uniform, whether it's the military, whether it's law enforcement. And we had people backstage, and I always want to take my time. And a man comes up. He was a police officer in New York City. First time anyone said this to me, he said, Mr. President, I want to thank you. My family thinks I'm a financial genius. My 401k is up 39% in 9 months. I think it's going to be very hard for somebody to beat us in a few years. Can you imagine? Now we're only talking about a few years. All you have to say is, with us it goes up, with them it goes down. And that's the end of the election, right?
The president tonight in Pensacola. Want to bring in the panel: David Gergen, Gloria Borger, also Bill Britt, editor-in-chief of the Alabama Political Reporter, Jack Kingston, Brian Fallon, and Tara Setmayer. David, first of all, what do you make of the president's remarks so far?
Classic Trump, lots of red meat, and he's in Trump country, and I reckon it will help Roy Moore some on next Tuesday. At the same time, Anderson, I think it's important to point out that if you look nationwide, the Trump rhetoric, the Trump bombast is actually continuing to lose some of its appeal. The latest poll from Pew has his approval rating down to 32%. That is a very dangerous level for a president to reach nationwide. But in terms of what he's trying to accomplish tonight, I think he probably helped himself and probably helped Roy Moore.
Yeah, Gloria, I mean, you pointed out last hour, by doing this rally in Florida, the president doesn't have to be with Roy Moore on stage. There's no photograph of them together, but the message is certainly the same.
Yeah, he said vote for Roy Moore, and he made it very clear we can't afford to lose a seat. The president has made the decision. He believes the seat is more important than any damage this might inflict on the Republican Party as a whole, say in the midterm elections, or the tough decisions Republicans would have if Roy Moore is elected. Don't forget, there are some Republicans who have said he should not be seated. And that's going to be another issue for them. You know, the president tonight made it very clear where he stands. And he took this opportunity to kind of do a greatest hits on everything he has accomplished, he believes, during his first year. To me, it was so much like a campaign rally with him talking about the rigged system and the sick system. And he said there's a lot of sickness. I think the problem is that the president is now the president of the United States. And so when he talks about the system, he's actually the one in charge here. And his supporters believe that he's changing things, but his popularity, it doesn't show that most of the country agrees.
Yeah. Bill, I mean, it's interesting. The president's remarks for the majority of the speech were not about Roy Moore. He's talking about the economy and immigration, crime, you know, as Gloria said, the rigged system, as he calls it. But, I mean, all are issues which certainly resonate with more voters, right?
They absolutely do. And as I was listening to that, I thought, without exception, it sounds a lot like a Roy Moore rally. I mean, it is about immigration. It is about the accomplishments of making America great. I mean, you know, if there were Roy Moore steaks, they would have been handing those out, because there certainly were a lot of Trump steaks out there raw.
Congressman Kingston, what do you make of where the president is at and what he's saying?
Well, I think he's enjoying himself. David is right. He's having a great time. Anderson, I was at the White House earlier today, and the president was speaking about unemployment, the new numbers that are out, 228,000 jobs last quarter. He is in a good mood right now. He's going down there. He's contagious. It is an absolute campaign rally. But, you know, he noticed, he put a little doubt in one of the accusers of Roy Moore. And then he quickly, having established that doubt, moved to the enemy territory, the safe enemies of Pelosi and Schumer, and then cast Ben in with them and said the stakes are too high. Because of all of the above, we don't need Schumer and Pelosi to get another vote. You and I need another vote in Washington. So, I think he's brilliant in his simplicity sometimes.
Tara, does I mean, you know, invoking, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, does that have the power that the president certainly believes it has?
I think certainly. I'm surprised he didn't say, he didn't bring up Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell's a dirty word down there in Alabama also. I think, I mean, I wouldn't use the term brilliant, but I think that he is savvy enough to understand what buzzwords amp up the electorate down there in Trump country. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are the boogeymen to those folks. And we have to remember, Alabama is a decidedly red Republican state. I think Barack Obama got something like 28% or 30% of the vote in Alabama, and where you have a considerably large amount of even African-American voters. And that's as well as Barack Obama did. So, again, it's